Deep tech is hard, like really, really hard. But when it hits big. And that's what Michael Markesbery did. After co-founding OROS Lab, out of college, he was on a mission to transform the insulation market. Yeah, boring old insulation. His NASA-inspired technology led to him starting a direct-to-consumer brand that was designed to prove that the tech actually worked first and have a functioning business model that later led to him raising over $50 million in venture capital for the likes of Airbus Ventures and other popular firms to transform both commercial, government, and consumer insulation market. If you're building deep tech, this episode is for you. And this is episode 53 of Fundraising Demystified, the show where I interview founders and investors that are actively raising or deploying capital in today's market. I'm your host, Jason Kirby, and I've built and sold multiple companies as a founder, operator, and investor across multiple industries and have been involved in over $135 million of transactions. This show is meant to uncover what's actually happening in the private capital markets and help founders and investors make better capital strategy decisions. The show is published weekly, and to get notified of new episodes and access a few freebies like our guide on how to negotiate a term sheet or get a free list of hyper-relevant investors, founders that have used our tools have gone on to raise over $1 billion. So be sure to subscribe at join.thunder.vc. Go ahead and get access to these free tools and content at join.thunder.vc. Now, on to the show. Welcome back to Fundraising Demystified. I'm your host, Jason Kirby, and today we have Michael Markesbery with us, co-founder and CEO of OROS Lab on the show with us today. Welcome to the show, Michael.
Jason, thanks for having me. I'm super excited to be here with you.
Now, I'm excited to have you on the show. You have a pretty interesting background building a deep tech material science company, but where I want to start is I just want to know what your story is. How did you go from building a direct-to-consumer apparel brand to what you kind of now call a material science company that's raised over $50 million. So just tell the audience a little bit about yourself and then kind of what your journey has been like.
Sure. My story is pretty simple. Again, I'm Michael, co-founder and CEO of OROS Labs. And when I was in college, I backpacked across Europe, ended up climbing my first mountain in the Swiss Alps. An incredible experience, but one really big problem. I looked like the Michelin Man on top of the mountain. And I remember thinking, like, this makes no sense. There's got to be a better way to cut bulk and still stay warm. So came back to the US and with a friend, Rithvik Venna, now co-founder and COO of the company, we started looking into insulation, not just apparel, but everything from buildings to aerospace, cold chain packaging, batteries, all just to try to find a solution to the Michelin Man problem that I had on top of the mountain. And what really surprised us was it seemed like all these other industries were struggling with the same challenge that I had in apparel. So as an example, we're both in a building right now. Half the world's energy consumption, 50%, trillions of dollars a year goes to producing heat. The largest consumer of that heat, buildings and structures. Said another way, if you can just improve the insulation in buildings and structures by a couple percentage points, you can save tens, if not hundreds of billions of dollars of energy consumption a year. Cold chain packaging. We ship so much medication all around the world, especially during COVID. And a lot of that medication, like vaccines, are temperature sensitive, meaning generally you got to keep them really cold or else they go bad. Well, it turns out we throw out $35 billion of temperature sensitive medication a year just because we can't keep it cold enough for long enough in transport. Aerospace, batteries, defense. The point being, Rith and I quickly realized, oh my gosh, the problem's not apparel, the problem is insulation. And if we can solve this insulation problem, we can make a pretty big impact across a variety of different markets. I then got super lucky, ended up getting a scholarship created by the Mercury 7 astronauts called the Astronaut Scholarship. And through the Astronaut Scholarship, we learned about this pretty amazing insulation called Aerogel. Aerogel's this pretty cool stuff that NASA was using to insulate spacecraft. So like all the Mars rovers and whatnot, insulated with Aerogel. And Aerogel, as we learned, is the lowest thermal conductive solid in existence, meaning it's the best insulation that we know of. And so we're hearing all this and thinking like, well, wait a minute. You're saying this is the best insulation we know of. We're using it in the most extreme environment in the universe, space, but it's not being used like in all these other industries. Like, what are we talking about? Like, this makes no sense. You could hypothetically transform thermal materials. We then got our hands on Aerogel and found out why this amazing material wasn't being used in all these different applications. And it turned out Aerogel is super brittle. If you put it in your hands, it just shatters into 1,000 little pieces. So we became obsessed with figuring out how do you take this amazing insulation and just make it flexible and durable enough so that you could use it in whatever application you want. And that launched the journey of OROS Labs. So that's super briefly riffing my story.
So NASA-inspired insulation, but insufficient to be commercialized, and you guys made it commercialized. So did you guys start selling your own consumer apparel with that product, and then you kind of went into the industrial kind of commercial aspect?
Absolutely. You nailed it. So we ended up creating the world's first flexible and durable aerogel composite called Solarcore Foam. Fortunate enough to get patents on it, validated that this thing worked. So tested it against over 400 other insulations. Haven't found anything more insulating, and that's great. It's really insulating. The real value proposition, though, was every insulation that exists today needs loft and bulk to work. So that's why your jackets are puffy. It's why, like, if I were to tear open the walls here in this building, it would be fiberglass insulation. Fiberglass is super lofted and bulky. All these insulations need that airspace or loft or bulk to work. So if you compress them, you lose that airspace, lose the ability to insulate. So you have that dependency on airspace, loft, bulk to work. That's not true with Aerogel, thereby not true with Solarcore. Meaning, for the first time in history, you can now have a thin amount of insulation that actually gives you meaningful thermal value. So that was the really big difference with Solarcore. Once we created the technology, we then wanted to generate awareness around the technology platform. And we found one of the best ways to do that was to create a consumer apparel brand called OROS Apparel. So we created OROS Apparel, an outdoor brand all around Solarcore to generate awareness around the Solarcore platform. That was the original way that we generated awareness and traction across our three target industries of consumer, commercial, government. So you absolutely nailed it.
And so what was that like, kind of, like, how did you get that started? Like, you're doing this kind of more deep tech, deep science, invention of a new material. And how did you guys raise money for it? What were the early days like, kind of getting that initial product in the consumer sector to market?
Great question. So when we started out, it was Rith and me in a college dorm room in Oxford, Ohio. And we had the money from the astronaut scholarship, and that was about it. So it was just us tinkering for candidly 2 years, from our sophomore years to our senior years of college, trying to figure out, hey, how do you make this aerogel stuff not brittle? Once we figured that out, it then became about, hey, how do we actually turn it into a product and validate that people would want to buy this stuff? That was a pretty tricky proposition too. But the fundraising side of it, hey, how do you go and buy the product? We originally launched the company, the Apparel brand, via a Kickstarter campaign. Are you familiar with Kickstarter?
Of course. Yep.
Okay, cool. And our goal was $100,000. This was our senior years of college, and Rith and I decided, hey, if we can hit $100,000, that proves that there's true validation and need for this technology we created, and it's worthwhile to go on this venture after college. So that was our benchmark, and launched the Kickstarter campaign. And in the first 36 hours, ended up hitting like $125,000. More money than Rith and I have seen before in our lives, and closed the Kickstarter campaign at 300 and something grand, 360 grand, and that was the start of OROS Labs, and that really gave us not just meaningful capital to go and start the business, but also I'd argue more importantly, meaningful traction, so that we could go out to investors and actually raise an institutional round and things like that.
So it was a couple $100,000 Kickstarter, and you get some traction, get some momentum. You go to market with your apparel brand on the installation type, Corp. And then how did you go, like, what was that journey to, and how long did it take in terms of timeline to start attracting institutional investors? Because in total you've raised over 50 million, since inception, and it's been roughly 9-10 years since you guys started. So, what was that like getting to that point, and how did you attract that capital?
Yeah. So we, our first round was around $2 million, a seed round, and it was right after we graduated college. So we raised that first round in 6 months post the Kickstarter campaign. And I don't believe we would have been anywhere near as successful if we hadn't had that traction that we had with the Kickstarter campaign. In terms of the process, Rith and I graduated college, two science geeks, with an entrepreneurship minor. We didn't know anything about raising money. So that was certainly a learning experience, and we were really fortunate to have a really strong group of advisors and mentors around us, that several of which have been through that process and were able to really help mentor and guide us through that initial fundraise.
So a successful Kickstarter to attracting the right type of mentorship and advisors to come in and help guide you to a $2 million seed round. So this is what, 2015, 2016 is around this timeline?
Correct.
DC funding was still popular back then. And so, still a lot of resources going towards it. At what point did you guys realize that you had a bigger, as you kind of already alluded to, you have a much bigger opportunity going after the bigger installation market and kind of divesting from the D2C brand and kind of licensing it out instead of, continue to build that brand? Kind of walk us through that decision flow and that timeline as well.
Absolutely. So from the beginning, the whole thesis of the business was to completely transform insulation cross-functionally across all these different markets. And we really broke it down into three different industries. Consumer, which is, consumer brands, namely footwear and apparel being the two largest categories in consumer. Commercial, which is a much broader spectrum. Think more industrial. This is everything from aerospace to cold chain packaging to batteries to buildings. And then government, largely led by the U.S. Department of Defense. those were the three industries that we identified. And our goal was to completely transform insulation cross-functionally across those. We created the Apparel brand to generate awareness around the Solar Core technology platform, such that we could generate awareness to eventually sell Solar Core within those industries. That ended up working. So we ended up garnering, over that period of time that we had the Apparel brand, meaningful traction in all three of those industries. So signed our first couple consumer brands, LL Bean, Cabela's, Merrill were some of our first ones. Signed our first commercial partners, got our first government contracts, largely all in part due to the awareness that we were able to generate around the Solar Core platform via the OROS Apparel brand. So once we had that original traction, for us, that was the trigger to go full steam into focusing 100% on material sales of the company across those three industries versus the Apparel brand.
Got it. So, and what year was that when you guys realized that was the kind of transition? You kind of had enough awareness at that point to make that transition.
2023 is when we licensed the Apparel brand to a PE firm and focused 100% of our energy on material sales of the technology.
Gotcha. And that also coincides with the very sizable recent raise. So I guess give us the history of the capital raising. So it's $2 million about, call it 8-9 years ago. What other capital did you raise and when did you raise it?
Yep. So we've raised a little over $50 million to date in equity capital for the business. The most recent round was in April of this year, 2024. We raised a $22 million round, our Series B, led by Airbus Ventures, the venture arm of Airbus. Our Series A and our Seed and C Plus were the prior rounds. So between those three, that was $28 million of capital raise.
And, when did you get your Series A? What year?
Our Series A was 2021.
Okay.
Was 2021.
And had you started generating revenue on the commercial or governmental side of the business at that point? Got it.
Yes.
So that makes sense.
That was when I would say we started to generate, when we had initial traction across all three. Some was more meaningful than others, but at that point we had meaningful traction across government, consumer, and commercial markets.
So, appreciate you giving me some background on, kind of the fundraising history and kind of where you guys been at and the overall development of the business. But I want to be frank here. Like a lot of our audience, they're in software, they're in consumer, they probably get the Apparel brand, but to understand material science, deep tech technology, I would like to kind of gravitate towards that area of the conversation to give our audience a little bit more of insight into how these businesses work. You talk about one angle in terms of licensing the technology to a PE firm for the apparel side of the business, so you kind of remove yourself from that aspect and can do focus on other things. But when it comes to the deep side, deep tech, are you manufacturing? Do you build the actual manufacturing facilities, the machinery, the equipment, or are you more or less outsourcing the development of that stuff? It'd be curious to kind of hear like how that process developed and also just like what you're using the amount of capital that you raised, what it's going towards.
Absolutely. We had two choices when it came to how we thought about manufacturing our technology. The two options are, do we take it in-house and do all the manufacturing ourselves, or do we go contract manufacturing? We ended up going contract manufacturing, at least today. And the reason we picked contract manufacturing was it provided immense scale very quickly, allowing us to grow the revenue of the company very quickly. Compared to if we went in-house, would have taken a lot more CapEx and a lot more time to stand up meaningful supply of the technology we had just created. that is a gross oversimplification, because at the same time, what we really had to focus on in order to make our technology able to be contract manufactured very easily was a lot of process engineering around, hey, how do we actually take what was historically a pretty hard material to make and make it so that we could walk into, foam manufacturers, and without them having to invest serious CapEx into new equipment, just be able to manufacture solar core foam using our IP. So that took a lot of amount of work to make that happen. But the benefit is it created the ability to rapidly scale manufacturing of our solar core technology. So we go contract manufacturing today. Will we always go contract manufacturing? That can be a pretty heated debate. The only downside with contract manufacturing, I'd say, or the main downside is gross margin. When you bring it in-house, you gain back all those points of gross margin you give to your. That's the debate over time between the two.
Yeah, and you get to a certain scale where, a certain level of revenue and profitability, and you can run the math of when it makes sense to kind of transition and bring it in-house. But it's also like it's a huge CapEx investment. It's basically what Tesla does, as far, for an easy reference, like they're building everything end to end, and look how much money and time it took to do that to reach that kind of scale.
Absolutely nailed it. That is exactly the equation.
And when it comes to the contract manufacturing relationship, you mentioned all the process engineering. Now, are you hiring all the engineers? Are you staffing up a large team of engineers to be able to solve those problems and then hand over those instructions to contract manufacturers, or are you relying on those partners to do it for you?
The former. That is a crucial part of the company. So at the end of the day, what does OROS Labs do? We create novel thermal insulation solutions, and then we sell those solutions to our partners. That creation portion includes the process engineering behind how do you actually make this stuff? How do you make it scalable? So we have an incredible team of engineers that I'm honored to work with, spanning everything from chemical to mechanical to textile engineers that really lead that process and make that happen.
Yeah, because effectively this solar core is going into apparel, it's going into tents, it's going into buildings, it's going into, trucks and delivery, it's going into just about anything and everything you could think of that, needs to control temperature of some kind. Now, is the material that you're developing, is it a one size fits all, then it's just a matter of fitting it in to those, materials, or do you have to have like a completely separate manufacturing process for each deliverable? Do you have to kind of seal it and size it up and send it to the customer that way, or do you just kind of say, hey, here's gallons of it, or I don't know what form of it it's in terms of liquid or foam or whatnot, but how is that kind of decided, and like how's that sales process as well? Because I imagine you also have a pretty sizable sales team going out educating the customer on the benefits, cost savings, performance, things of those sorts.
Absolutely. So our goal was to make it as easy to adopt as physically possible. And what our first technology is solar core foam. And the technology is just that. So taking a step back, how did we make aerogel not brittle? Well, all we did is we just created a composite out of it. So solar core foam is part foam, part aerogel. You get the flexibility and the durability of the foam. You get the insulation of the aerogel. Gives you the best of both worlds. That was our first patent. That was our first technology, solar core foam. And if you look at all the industries we serve today, they all used insulation prior to using solar core foam. But guess what type of insulation they used? They used a foam. So in our consumer's mind, all they need to do is just swap out their existing solution with our solution. It doesn't change their manufacturing process or assembly process in any way, but gets them all the benefit of the technology, which is drastically increased thermal performance without any of the bulk.
Did you know that most founders waste days of their lives chasing the wrong investors? Well, as a founder, you know your time is your most valuable resource. Don't waste it on the investors that aren't going to write you a check. Here at Thunder, we built a free tool that identifies exactly which VCs are worth your time to pursue. We score your company against 3,500 VCs and family offices that have been vetted and are actively writing checks into companies like yours. Get your AI recommended list of investors that will look like this absolutely free by creating a free profile at Thunder.vc. You can upgrade to premium to download this list, export it to any tool you wish, and get their contact information and access the data on their portfolio companies to map out a path to warm intros and build your founder network. Sign up for free at Thunder.vc. Now let's get back to the show.
So when it comes to the application, you try to, again, fit exactly what already the market does today and allow you just to kind of slide in with a higher performance. From a pricing perspective, how do you think about, setting the price of this material? Is it a application based? Do you do value-based pricing? Do you do cost plus, pricing? How do you guys think about it?
Great question again. So we're upper middle market, so we're premium, not luxury. You can find more expensive insulations than silicone foam all day long. Goose down, to name one. Vacuum insulated panels, to name another. But you're also going to find things way less expensive than silicone foam. These are things like generic polyfills, for example. The difference is cross-functionally, we're going to be beating all those insulations from a thermal performance perspective and a lack of bulk perspective. So that's our general thought process on pricing. I will also say, historically, aerogels are incredibly expensive. So in order to make aerogels accepted in the commercial market, we also had to focus a lot on how do we cost engineer our solution to make it price competitive. And that was also, along with that process engineering that we talked about earlier, a lot of our work up front in order to make solar core priced appropriately for the market. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does. And I think, at this point, you're going to hit on a lot of the consumer applications and uses and stuff like that. But, the whole other animal is going after, government contracts. I think it's easy to understand commercial cost benefit analysis, pretty easy, but going into, breaking in to government, getting them to, get approved as a vendor and selling to them. How has that been? Looks like you work with some of the military branches with your products. Did you just hire the right talent? Did you do it yourself? What was your process to kind of get your foot in the door there?
Yeah, great question. When we first took a step into government, I didn't know anything. We didn't know anything about working with the government. And so for us, that was a pretty clear sign that while we knew it was the right market to be in and something that we were also personally excited about doing and believed was the right thing to do, we needed the right experience around the table. So the first thing we did is, and part of that mentor advisor group we talked about, brought in some government experts that really knew that space better than us. That could help guide us to, how we get into the market. Once we did that, via a lot of their guidance, we then brought in a consultancy firm that focuses on contracts within the Department of Defense. That consultancy firm was super helpful for some of our original contracts with the DoD, spanning everything from cold weather apparel to tactical shelters, to pipe insulation. our first 3 programs with the DoD. And then from there, once we started to grow those programs and get to the stage of procurement, we knew it was time to start building some internal team that really could lead that initiative going forward. So from there, we hired our head of government. His name's Dale Suzuki. Dale's absolutely incredible, and has been in the government industry his whole career, and built a team, with Dale to support the procurement initiative with the DoD.
So basically going out, finding that you have a market opportunity, accepting the fact that you're not maybe qualified to go and address that market yourselves, and sourcing the right talent, pulling on your network to kind of bring those people into the position to go and execute for you. So again, just being able to attract top talent, which I think from your mission and your product and what you're doing, I think it's an easy mission to buy into and attract talent, which often attracts capital. So transitioning back to your most recent round, when you went out to raise, at this point you have some traction. People probably know who you are. What was that experience like? When did you say, I want to go out and raise more money? And what was your process from there to go out and raise this most recent Series B?
Great question. So when we knew we wanted to raise the Series B, we were in 2023. And I think all in, it took us around 12 months, maybe a little longer, from first pitch to close. So that was, I think, a little longer than the standard 9 months from pitch to close. Definitely, I think, a tougher economic climate in 2023 than prior raises. But our general process was, hey, and our whole philosophy for the Series B was we wanted to bring in value add capital. So for us, that meant that while all money is green, we wanted entities around the table that could help us scale the business. And that really showed up when you look at the cap table today. So really honored to have Airbus Ventures having led that round. Again, Airbus Ventures is just a venture arm of Airbus, the large aerospace company. The value add there is pretty innate. Some other investors around the table include REI's venture arm. REI is one of the large outdoor retailers here in the U.S. Goldwyn's venture arm. Goldwyn is the largest outdoor apparel conglomerate in Japan. So they have the licenses in Japan to the North Face, Helly Hansen, you name it. Crumpton Ventures, founded by Hank Crumpton. Hank is the former deputy director of the CIA. Incutel, a bunch of really great investors that we're honored to have around the table, all of which kind of lived up to that fundamental thesis or ethos of value add capital. So that was our whole theory.
How did you get in front of those investors? You mentioned it's 12 months from maybe your first conversation to checks at the bank, but how did you get in front of them? Did you cold email them? Did you beg your advisors to find a path to an intro? Like how did you navigate the path to those investors?
It was a super surgical approach generally. Some cases we just got lucky. We got introed. That was the case for Crumpton Ventures for sure. But for the most part, it was a very surgical approach. So what we did there was we started by looking at companies similar to our own in some regard that had recently raised rounds and looked at who they were raising from to then identify, hey, who are the right venture firms that will be interested in the deal? And then we screen those venture firms for, hey, who do we think could be value add? So from there, if you look at 10 companies similar to your own, you can probably find 100 venture firms. Screen those venture firms then against, value add, you're down to like 50 or so. And then you can tier those out however you want into A, B, and C groups or whatnot. But then from there, we looked at all the partners at the firms, and cross-reference those partners on LinkedIn to see, hey, who do we have mutual connects into? Are we connected to any of them directly, any of them not directly? And then establish who we had connections to. And when it was time to raise, we then asked our connections to those individuals to do a warm intro in. And what we found is that warm intros are generally a lot more successful than, cold emails. VCs, my sense is VCs generally don't respond to cold emails. And so that's how we really kicked off our initial conversations and kicked off the process with VCs. Was a very surgical approach. And that was the overview of our approach.
And so a lot of these relationships, I imagine, were brand new. Like you kick off the pitch, and then first time meeting these people, there's a misconception, in my opinion, in the market where founders are like, we need money in a month. Let's go and start raising money. Or like, we had a bunch of meetings, but no one invested yet. It's like, it takes time to kind of nurture those relationships. So like, for example, and I'm not sure if Airbus is the best example, but from one of the kind of main investors that came in this round, from the point that you met them and the amount of touch points that you had before they gave you a term sheet or agreed to invest, how many touch points do you think it was?
Oh my gosh. That's a great question. Easily over a dozen.
Yeah.
Dozen meaningful, and then probably way more smaller touch points as well. Quick text or phone calls, but at least a dozen meaningful touch points.
And that's before they commit.
Correct.
And I just try to remind founders on a regular basis that they think that they're going to do an intro meeting, they're going to do a data room deep dive, and then they're going to get a term sheet. And it's so not the case. You're building this, at least from the outside of what you're sharing, like what could be a very world-changing product. You check all the boxes for venture scale. I'm not looking at your financials or anything like that, but let's just assume they check the box. And it still, takes you 12 months. Granted, the market wasn't great, especially for Series B. I think what generally was in a harder, spot than most. But you grinded it out. You planned accordingly. It looks like you managed your cash position to be able to withstand a 12-month capital raise. So one, I just want to give you a little kudos for being surgical, being kind of doing what I try to project as like the right way about trying to get capital in the door is don't do it when you're absolutely desperate because that no one wants you. Start it well in advance and build those relationships over time. So I think that's great to hear on how you manage that process. So, now that you kind of shared all this, what would be your advice to founders out there that are building their companies that might be in deep tech or somewhere in an adjacent space? What would be your advice to them?
Jason, I think you just nailed and summarized the major takeaways we had from that fundraise. Leave yourself meaningful cash runway before you start raising. Be very surgical and thoughtful in your approach. I'd say one thing that we could have done a little better that I would do differently is foster those relationships early, even before you start your formal fundraise. I think that'll save you a lot of time in your fundraise and also give you the opportunity to really understand, who you're partnering with as well. All of which are massive benefits going into a fundraise.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that's very insightful and wise sage advice for someone that just went through it, just a few months ago from you guys closing your round and, you just came out of the thick of it. And I would say one of the tougher markets specifically for kind of the later stage capital round. So, well done. So for founders that might want to learn more about your technology and what you're up to, where should founders go?
Yeah. Our website is oroslabs.com. My email, if you ever want to reach out to me, is michael@solarcore.tech. So feel free to ping me at any time, or check out our website, LinkedIn as well.
Be careful. Sometimes I get reports of founders reaching out, sending out requests, and just be thoughtful. Don't send them a cold email if you're listening. Or you send them a cold email, just be thoughtful and personalized. Don't just add them to a list of spam. Unfortunately, I've seen that happen. Well, Michael, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. We'll make sure to get those links in the show description down below. It's been an absolute pleasure having you, and you look forward to sharing your story with our audience.
Jason, thanks for having me. It's been an absolute blast. Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the show today. We hope you learned something valuable, and if you did, be sure to let us know in the comments or by hitting that like button. And if you're a founder looking to raise capital, then join us at Thunder.vc. We provide a free tool to help you identify which VC, family offices, or lenders are the best fit for you using our AI. It will save you a ton of time from chasing the wrong investors. And since launching our free tools, founders that have joined our network have gone on to raise over $1 billion in financing. Again, you can find these free tools at Thunder.vc. And as a reminder, we release new episodes every week, so stay informed by subscribing to our newsletter at join.thunder.vc. Again, that's join.thunder.vc. And if you or someone you know has recently raised a round and want to share your story, please email me at jason@thunder.vc. And that's our show. We hope you enjoyed it, and we see you next week.